I can. Can you hear me now? All right. Hello, Professor. How are
Hi,
you?
how are you?
I'm good.
Doing
I'm
well.
good. Yeah. So, like, I've been trying for a long time to like contact either you or Henry Akins to do an interview because I'm so interested in knowing about this unseen side of jiu-jitsu, like the invisible one, the Kama style, the Hicks and Gracie style that nobody talks about like a lot because we see all these sports evolving and all this new school stuff, leg locks, Danaher game, and all those stuff. So, how did jiu-jitsu happen to you in your life? Because like I think jiu-jitsu is the best thing that I have ever made a venture into. So, like, how did you get into jiu-jitsu, and how did you get to meet Kama?
So I was in college in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii, and a friend of mine told me about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and this is back in 1989. And growing up in Hawaii, all the martial arts were largely Japanese or Chinese
Right.
sourced. And but I've heard the term jiu-jitsu. I grew up with hearing the term jiu-jitsu. Never saw it, never did it. But then I saw Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and I thought that was kind of odd because there was no Japanese name in front of it, right? And so, but at the University of Hawaii, there were these flyers that were posted on bulletin boards all over the campus. I'd see them walking from class to class, but I never really thought anything of it until that friend of mine told me, like I was looking for another martial art to pursue, and he said I need to try Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So I watched the Gracie in action video. It happened to be at my at the university library. I watched it, and after I saw Elio put Kato to sleep, and
Yeah.
saw when Halls, Horian, Hansson, and I guess that one 14-year-old kid go up against the karate school, then I thought, okay, this is what I want. And I couldn't find that flyer again on the boards. When I decided, I'd see the flyer on the board all the time, but I'd see it, but I didn't do anything about it. But when I finally decided to do something about it, it wasn't there anymore. But I happened to bump into Hansson Gracie at a nightclub, and he was wearing his shirt, just like the way I'm wearing my Kama Jiu-Jitsu shirt.
Mhm.
He was wearing his Gracie Jiu-Jitsu shirt, and thankfully, because he was wearing his shirt, I found out who he was, and that was it, and then I did that one day, that first time, and I was hooked, and I've been doing it. Well, I've been doing it ever since, but there was a period of time from about 97 to 2007 that was very few training, but I still trained. I just didn't train regularly. Might have been once a month, might have been once every 6 months, but I took about basically a 10-year break from it. But I always had mats in my
Oh, okay.
house, so
Uh-huh.
I could always have people come over. Friends that I knew who wanted to train, they'd come over, they'd beat me up, and then go home, and I'd regret training, thinking, man, I really hurt. But then after about a week or two after I recover, I go, man, I hope I can get to training again. But just life got in the way, and I had a hard time finding time. And then in 2007 or 2008, I just decided it's time. So called my instructor at the time, Brad
Mhm.
Jackson, and started up again.
Okay. So was Hanson your first instructor? Like, how long did you uh,
So I trained with Hansson from sometime in 1989 when I started to May of 92 when I moved out of Hawaii and I moved to Southern California. I moved to Torrance.
Okay, so you basically were one of the practitioners that were like doing it before the world knew about jiu-jitsu in
Oh yeah,
1993, right?
yeah. When I started, Hansson School probably had a total of maybe 20 members.
Okay.
20, yeah, about
Back then it
20.
was
And they,
very unpopular and nobody knew how legit it was, right?
well, I wouldn't say it was unpopular. It was just not known.
Not known.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody knew of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu until the UFC. Now, some of us would see it in the magazines, in the martial arts magazines, for those of us who read those, right? So that's once I started taking Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, then I'd see it pop up in the magazines like Black Belt, and I don't know what the magazines were back then anymore besides Black Belt. And then when the UFC happened, I was already at Gracie Torrance,
Right.
and and Hoist was preparing for it.
Right.
And once it happened, then I remember talking to my friends back home in Hawaii, and all of a sudden they said the school was packed and they had a waiting list. And last I remember, because two of my best friends are Chris and Mike Onzuka. They run O2 martial arts in Hawaii, in Aiea, Hawaii. And they were the first House and Gracie affiliate. And that school opened because Hanson he didn't have room to take in all the people on the waiting list. So they had decided that they would open a campus that wasn't near Honolulu, and to take the people that were on the waiting list and train them. And that's how O2 got started. O2 is the longest running martial arts, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school in the state of Hawaii. Yeah, continuously, because Hanson doesn't run a school anymore. But yeah, well, I'd call my friends back and they'd say, man, and you know, when I was in Hawaii training at Hanssons' place, we might have in a class maybe 10 people, maybe 15 people on a busy night. He says, but now we have like 50 or 60 people, and some people can't even get in because it's so full. But it blew up after the UFC.
Yeah, it really did blow up after the UFC, because like everybody was, what's the stuff that Hoist is doing? Like, is it like extremely advanced wrestling or what is it? Like, because like even the commentators were not having an idea of what's going on. And they were like, oh, this is like a choke. He got knocked out when he got choked out. All this stuff.
Yeah, they had no clue. And we saw it happening in the academy all the time whenever people come for challenge matches. But so that's right. When Hoist went up, and you know, even though I knew Hoist wasn't the best family member, in my mind, there is no doubt that Hoist would win, because I've seen Hoist destroy guys, you know, bigger, better, faster than people that showed up in the UFC. And yeah, so I had no doubt. Even when in the second UFC, when Dan Severn was in Hoist's guard and you know, trying to smash him in Hoist's guard, and I had friends I was watching it with on TV, and they were saying, "Oh, that Hoist is in trouble." I said, "No, he's actually
just a matter of time."
Yeah, he was fine. You know, the only one that was, you know, was possibly concerned when I saw him, like, whoa, you know, was when he fought with Chemo. And that was if Chemo didn't have that long ponytail, then the fight might have turned out different. Yeah, I don't know. You know, Chemo's a nice guy. You know, I used to lift weights at a gym years later, and I'd see him all the time in there, and you know, we'd talk, and he's a good guy. You know, but it was just fighting. You know, that's all it was. You know, it wasn't anything personal. But Chemo's a good guy. Chemo's a black belt in jiu-jitsu too now. Years later, he got it. Oh yeah. But that, you know, him going up against Hoist, and later he had a sparring session with Kenny Gabrielson, another one of my instructors. And you know, that's after training with Kenny, that's what made him decide he better learn this stuff. So he did.
Wise decision for him. I learned it the hard way. So like nowadays, like in the present, like we go to jiu-jitsu schools, which are like phenomenal. But when we go inside, like all the sports jiu-jitsu stuff, all the schools, like they teach you stuff, like they just randomly put you in a half guard technique or something which you don't have any idea about, like without like teaching you the basics, without no structure. So what was it like training jiu-jitsu back then when you joined? How structured was it, or what were the basics that you were taught as a beginner and then intermediate, and how was it? Because now you just go into some random school and they start teaching you some random stuff, you know.
So it really depends on if you did group classes or private classes. So I did both. And, you know, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'd be at the university where we had classes, and Tuesday afternoons, I'd be at Hanssons' house where I got my privates.
Wow.
And if, you know, historically, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was just taught in private one-on-one sessions. So they'd have the 36 basic lessons of jiu-jitsu, and you would go through that, you know, your one-on-one sessions. They typically do half an hour privates, although these days privates are more 60-minute privates. But, you know, back then it was 30-minute private, and he would go through lesson one. So lesson one would, I'm trying to think offhand, I don't know exactly what was in Hansson's or Elio's original lesson plan, the 36 lessons, but each of his sons has kind of tweaked it and changed it a little bit. But you'd go through the lesson, and then, you know, once you have it down, then your next private, you do the next one, next private, next one, and, you know, until you have a good handle on everything. And then on those, in those years, after you did your 36 lessons, you'd have your blue belt. Right? That's what it took to get your blue belt. Back then, there were no stripes on a white belt. It was just from white to blue. And the blue belt wasn't really anything spectacular. It was just that you're no longer a white belt. You're not a beginner anymore. But if you go to group classes, then it would be a typical circular method. You just learn whatever they're teaching that day, and Hansson would decide what he would teach that day. But by the time Hansson got into the studio, we already had the heavy warm up. We did a good 30-minute warm up. Then we would do some self-defense concept. It could be headlock escape, it could be takedowns, it could be judo throws, could be grab defense, all those the regular stuff that you see in the Gracie self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Then we do that for another 30 minutes. And then Hansson would come in about that time, probably about 7:30 is when he would get in. He would take attendance, and then he would then take over from the junior instructor who was running the warm-up in the self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
He would then take over and teach a ground concept. Could be a guard pass, it could be how to hold mount, it could be how to choke mount, it could be arm bar, whatever. But that's how he would teach. So that's how we learned. It wasn't a linear style at all in the group classes, but it was pretty, I wouldn't call it linear. Linear meaning you learn the most basic concept first, then the next class you learn a little bit more advanced, a little more. It wasn't like that. It was more random, but it was parceled out into the 36 lessons. So I think the Gracie University calls those first 36 lessons the combatives.
Yeah, combatives.
Yeah. And we just started, we also took down, we broke our curriculum up to what we call the fundamentals curriculum, combat jiu-jitsu fundamentals curriculum, and then we have white to blue curriculum. So white to blue curriculum includes both the fundamentals as well as everything else that's in there, because it's a lot of material to cover. Our white to blue curriculum is pretty extensive.
Okay.
Because it covers all the self-defense as well as I can't say most, a lot of the grappling concepts, but all the most important stuff that important to us, what we think
like
are
solid basics.
Yes.
Okay. So in those days, like they believe that a blue belt is somebody that is supposed to beat a bigger athletic person who has no training in martial arts, according to Gracie. But how did they like test you to know whether you're like a blue belt? That's how like they put you in the Gracie challenge or something like that. Like
no, generally we wouldn't have blue belts doing Gracie challenges.
Okay.
If the instructor thought that his student was particularly good or against the opponent, then yeah, he would put him in. But generally, challenges were done by black belts. And I know Dave Kama, he did them as a blue belt. He was, from what I understand, Gracie in the US, he was the first non-black belt to do challenges representing the school.
Mm-hmm.
I did a challenge as a blue belt, but I was already training 3 years by then.
Okay.
So I was by no means a beginning blue belt, and it was in Hansson's garage. But yeah, it wasn't really. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they determined who would do the challenge or something. But yes, I mean, for us, if you earn a blue belt, you're what we call street ready.
Yes.
Now, street ready doesn't mean you'll be able to take anybody out. Street ready means that you're ready to deal with a confrontation, whether it be getting away, engaging, and continuing on and finishing if you need to. Mm-hmm. But blue belt is just the first belt. The first colored belt. Mm-hmm. And you still have all the levels of blue, all the levels of purple, brown before you get to black. Yeah. So a blue belt is by no means near the level of a black belt. And once you get to purple, that's when we call you street ready. Okay. As opposed to street proficient versus street ready. So, mm-hmm. Where you would be able to handle as a purple belt, you should be able to handle somebody who's an untrained combatant, as well as many trained combatants. But when they're trained in similar art to you, then it's just who's better at the art. Then it gets down to who's a better purple belt than the other purple belt. That there's a lot of factors that come into play there. Right. When you're fighting somebody who already knows how to fight, then, that to us is the most valuable skill to have, to be able to fight somebody who knows how to fight.
Exactly.
But it takes years to get to that point. And not years because we want to hold you back. It's years because your body needs to develop the link between your mind and your body, as well as being able to know what you need to do and then have it be done instinctively. That's what the years takes, and that's why a black belt in jiu-jitsu takes so long. Averages anywhere from 8 to 12 years. Of continuous training, and not just rolling and doing the same things over and over and over again, and not growing. And not getting your skills better. You know, just because you roll for 10 years doesn't mean you necessarily be a black belt. I've seen guys who roll for 10 years and they're no better than a good white belt or a blue belt.
Right. That's a waste of time, like, you know, waste of time and energy, like if you don't improve.
It just depends on what your goals are. You know, some people just like to roll for therapeutic reasons. It's a good outlet for them and it's good exercise.
Exactly.
And they may say they want to get better, but they don't really. You have newer guys coming in and passing them, and some people, they don't care. You know, some people get really upset about it and they say, okay, then they do something about it. That's when they start, okay, asking their coach, why is this guy who came in after me, who's built like me, same age, same strength, why is he past me up? And that's where we all get our revelation of, you know, everything we've been doing wrong.
Yeah.
Some professors are more on top of their students in making sure the students maintain their pattern of growth. And some professors are like, you know, I just teach, you learn, and it's up to you after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try to be more hands-on.
They just give belts based on the duration that you have, you know, been training for or something like that, instead of like the depth you have gone into.
Well, I'm sure they look some into it, but it's much easier to just look at attendance.
Exactly.
But when you do attendance, then what happens is, you know, somebody who attends 500 classes is not necessarily going to be as good or better than another person who does 500 classes.
Right.
You know, they're not going to be the same. You know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a way to make it so people, as far as knowledge goes, they're at the same level, depending on whatever time they're in. Now, their abilities may be different.
Yes.
Because, you know, just because you know the curriculum and you can do the curriculum doesn't mean that you can do it better than everybody else.
The ability to execute may be different.
Correct. I mean, if you have somebody and you don't give them any resistance, and they'll both be able to do it to you and explain it to you and say, yeah, this is the arm bar and it's perfectly set up. Yeah. But when there's resistance, then, you know, then the abilities are a little bit different. And some person may just be able to put the arm bar on you. Another person may have to tempt you with a choke to defend the choke before he puts the arm bar on you. Right. Some other person may have to make you block a sweep before they get the arm bar on you. You know, so it's all different, and that's the best thing about jiu-jitsu to me, is that it allows people to be different yet equally skilled. Yes. And
in their own ways.
Yeah, at the same time, it's really the battle of jiu-jitsu is not against. I mean, on the surface, it's you against your opponent, but really, it's you against you.
Yes. So that's gonna be my next question, because many people like ask me, oh, like, you know, because some people do not even understand the main objective of jiu-jitsu. For me, I think the main objective of BJJ is to survive. That's why, like, even Coach Firaz Zahabi, he was like kind of making, I won't say a mockery, but he was just kind of, you know, commenting on what Hickson said in a podcast with Joe Rogan, where Hickson said, like Eddie Bravo and Joe Rogan were asking Hickson Gracie, like, what would you do if you like try to go for a sweep and you open the guard and the guy stands up, and Hickson says like, oh, you stand back up and try to pull guard again, and they were like, that doesn't make any sense. But what Hickson meant was, if you can survive, if he disengages, that means like there is no danger anymore. You can either stand up or run away, or like you at least survive. In terms of survival, you are safe. You don't have to like necessarily try to like, you know, have him in your guard unnecessarily. So do you think the main objective of jiu-jitsu is being misconstrued, because like the MMA is so popular now and everybody's trying to choke within like five minutes or like 25 minutes time?
Well, survival is just the first part of it.
Okay.
And I call it survive and then thrive. And you know, you need to survive first before you can thrive. Whereas if you only learn how to submit people, right? If all you do is you go into class and learn how to do setups for choke, for arm bars, for sweeps and all that, but you don't know you don't have any defense, then you'll never get to the position of being able to execute a submission.
Right.
So the first thing that we teach our white belts is they need to survive. Yes. And in fact, probably the first 65 to 75% of their journey to blue belt is all about defense and self-defense, right? Okay. Only in the last part or the later parts of their white belt do they actually learn how to do submissions, or at least certainly from the second half on. And in fact, even in the first half, depending on who they are, depending on their physicality, depending on the knowledge level they have when they come into the studio, we don't even let them train. I mean, train as in just spar. But, you know, we may be doing, so today we're going to be doing what we call connected guard passing. And so what will happen is the very beginners will be working on connected guard passing. You know, they'll be trying to pass, trying to connect and put their weight in the right spot, play the angles correctly. We go through all that with them, but we do it timed. You know, so once we teach them how to do it, then we put them together in pairs and we go time, maybe 3-minute rounds. And your only objective is to pass using that style of pass that we showed you. And the person on the bottom, their goal is to not let them pass. And then after you pass, then you go right back and you do it again. You don't just keep going and going and going, because the objective is to have them do their 50 to 100 reps on that exercise we're doing today, not do it 2 or 3 times and then roll for the rest of the time. But because rolling is more situations can come up when you're rolling. And this person may have seen all the problems of being under mount, but when they get into somebody's guard, they don't see it. In fact, I had a white belt who's probably 2 or 3 weeks in, and he'd never been in a guard passing class yet, because he's learning how to escape the mount, escape the worst position, the seatbelt. And he ended up in somebody's guard and he got arm barred. And, you know, I had to watch and I had to tell the guy, don't arm bar him yet. He doesn't know that yet. He's not up to the point of even recognizing that it's a problem. And that's why a lot of people get injured, is because they're just let loose to roll at too early a point in time. So we just do the controlled drills and we stop, get back in, do the drill, stop, get back in. Eventually, once you drill everything piece by piece, you'll have everything. Right. So it's just everybody has their ways of teaching, and some people who do a circular method of teaching, right, they're phenomenal. So, you know, it's not to say that the way we do it is the only way, it's just the way we do it. Other people are going to have their own ideas on how they want to teach their students and how early they're going to let them roll or how late. It's really up to them. You know, each instructor has a responsibility to their students to have their student learn in the best, most efficient way. And we believe we've got a pretty good way to do it here.
Right. So I think that is a specialty in Hanssons lineage, because they focus on like getting deep into the fundamentals. Like, as you said, like every position, like isolate and like, you know, like try to get as deep as possible into each and every position so that you have a solid defense game. So like, tell me something about like training with Hansson. Like that is the $1 million question everybody asks everybody that trained with Hansson, because like the things I read online, the interviews, they are like completely unbelievable, but like apparently true. So everybody says like Sanji Ribeiro, Andre Galvao, Fabricio Verdum, Fabio Churchill, like we can. It's not like, oh, he's very tough, he's excellent. It's not like that. They're like, there's no way out. So, but like there are very few videos that we could like see on like YouTube or something. But it is like just like the roles with the people who attended the seminars or something. So like you, like people like you who have like witnessed it like in real time, like what do you think is the specialty, or can you like tell me like what you have like witnessed during training, like what is special, like your experiences of rolling with him? What do you feel different than the other people?
Hansson is, it's hard to describe it, but you feel it with him. He's not something you can kind of look at it and go, you can see what he's doing by looking at it. That's why he calls it invisible. But you definitely feel it. You think normally if I'm in a certain position, he's on top of me, normally I can move here. It doesn't matter who it is, I can move. But with him, for some reason, that door is closed. And it's just, he has that ability. And that's why he calls it invisible. It's because you feel it, but you don't see it. And even people that are watching it can't necessarily see it. And his ability to pin you and it's phenomenal in that he was never a big guy. You know, I think even at his largest, he might have been 200 pounds at the very end of his career. But he would walk around at about 145 pounds. And no, 185 pounds.
85,
yeah. 5'9", 185, or 5'8", 5'9". That was his height, and 185 pounds. But he felt much heavier than massive guys, right? And you mentioned Fabio Gurgel. I met him once because one of Hickson's black belts, who was a purple and a brown belt then, I used to go to his house and train on Sundays. And one of those Sundays, I knocked on the door, and Fabio Gurgel opened the door. He was staying over. He had come in from Brazil to train with Hickson, and he'd come and train with Hickson because Hickson was the best, and Fabio Gurgel wanted to be the best, obviously. And you could see it in his competition record. He competed back when jiu-jitsu wasn't really BJJ; it was still jiu-jitsu, and he was a champion. And he's created tons of champions after
including
him,
Marcelo.
Marcelo,
Damian Maya. Damian Maya.
Is Damian Maya Fabio Gurgel?
Yeah.
I know Leo Vieira. Yep. So. He's and those are just a few, right? I mean, he runs the Alliance team, and it's amazing what he's been able to do. But he did, his instructor was Homero Jacare, but really, I know he got a lot of insight from making a trip up to train with Hickson, and being that he was one of the best, Hickson was always open to training with him, and because it kept Hickson sharp as well. But yeah, I know from what I understand, Hickson, it wasn't even a match. I mean, Hickson was just, Fabio would probably push him, but not to a degree.
He said like in a 5-minute drill, I got submitted like 9 times, which was like, okay, if he's like the world-class black belt, then what makes Hickson, then what is Hickson then? Like, so like we never hear any other stories about anybody else. Like, this is unbelievable. I'm just asking this question to just know what the limits of human potential is. So like, it's unimaginable.
It's just, well, Hickson is human, of course, but when it just comes to jiu-jitsu, his knowledge is just so deep that I don't know how you can explain it. He can see stuff that we can't see. Right. It's almost like if you think about when you look at, visible light, the spectrum of light and stuff that we see, we believe what we see in our eyes, but can we see a radio wave? Right. Can we see, we can't see a lot of stuff. I mean, there's all that ultraviolet stuff that we cannot see. So what I imagine it to be is that Hickson has better vision. So I can see within this range, but Hickson can see up here and he can see below here. His range is much bigger than mine. So I'm playing within here, whereas he's playing out here in these areas, and I don't even see what's going on. Right. And I don't even know it's there. And all of a sudden, when he comes back into my world, that's when he has my arm. That's when he has me choked. And it's because he can see it. And no matter what I do, he sees everything what I do. And it's basically moving slow motion to him. Whereas for me, it's not that he's fast, because Hickson is fast, but he doesn't play fast to beat you. He plays what he calls connected. He's connected to you. He's heavy. So what I was taught by Dave that makes the difference with Hickson is that Hickson adds his particular brand of weight distribution, right? So if you imagine how you've got a lever over here, and if the weight is here, you can move the weight over here. Hickson somehow knows how to get the weight way up here, and you can't move it anymore. Right. And that's why he's not really heavy, but he feels like he's heavy. Whereas most people are playing right here. And, the little guy gets thrown, the big guy, if you get in a little closer, you can throw him. But with Hickson, let's say he's out here and you try moving in, he moves out. You try moving in, he moves out. And you'll never, ever be able to get to the point where he's at. But at the same time, it's almost like when you're trying to move in here, he anticipates, he sees you. So as you're moving in, he's already moving out, or he's going on this side of you here, right? So, by the way, that's the first time I've ever done an illustration with a straw. So
that's fine.
But yeah, that's really what it is. His vision is just so much bigger. So, for instance, like when I train with my students, I've got a wider field of view than my students, right? I'm trying to show them, here, this is outside here. Come look over here. Dave's got a wider view than mine, and Hickson's got a wider view than his. And we're always trying to catch up our instructor. Now, at some point, and a lot of points, students do surpass the instructor. That means either the instructor was bad or the instructor was very good at teaching his student and showing him everything he's got and telling him there's actually, this is what I have for you. You were here, but I've expanded you out to where I am. But there's a whole world out here that you
Yes.
need to go explore,
Yeah.
right? And for that, I need you to go talk to this person, right? So
Right.
that's where, once, let's say as when I create, students that are black belts, even the brown belts now, Dave comes in every month. He was just here yesterday. He just left this weekend. But I just tell the students they need to take more time with Dave. And I tell Dave, okay, these are the ones that I'm almost done giving them what I have. So now it's time for you to take over.
Okay.
And that's really what it is. It's just the breadth of vision that individual people have, right?
Mm-hmm.
From here on, let's say it's all black belt, but you have other black belts that have this much and you have this much, and and that's what makes the difference in black belts so great,
Yep.
right? If you look at Hansson in his prime versus an ordinary average jiu-jitsu black belt who's legit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference in ability is probably greater than the difference in ability between the black belt and a white belt.
Wow. Oh, really?
It's tremendous.
Wow.
So the way Dave explained it to me is you have all the whole universe of black belts. You have what we call the low-hanging fruit, which are the black belts who are not, particularly good or whatever. And then you have the average black belt, which is the biggest group. And, they're you train with them, you go, okay, he's a legit black belt. Then you have the elite. The elite black belts are where all your top level guys, world champions, fighters and all that. And then you have Hansson. That's the way Dave put it to me. And it makes perfect sense, because, when I did train with Hansson, nobody could touch him. Nobody could come even close. Yeah. And he could tell you what he's going to get you in, and you can block that one thing and give him everything else, and he'll still take it from you.
And I've also heard stories where he lets black belts put him in a completely sunken rear naked choke, do something.
Yeah, he would do that. He would let you get the full rear naked choke. He'd let you get a full arm bar on him. You're here, you have the arm bar, and would. Well, I think it's because of the vision. Like I said, the field of view. Right. So you're able to put your choke in here, but he knows the escape is out here. So you're only as good as you are in your own abilities.
Right.
But his ability to escape is beyond your ability to execute. So even though you have it in, you think you have it, and he would let you put it, and he would let you squeeze his neck, and his voice is changing. He said, "Oh, you got it? You got it? You sure?" Right? And he go, make it tighter. And he go, tight, and poof, and he's out. And you're like, what the
heck?
And then somebody had I guess somebody had attended a Hansson Gracie seminar, and they were complaining about how he's got such a massive ego, and he's just he would abuse the attendees, make them look, not abuse like physically abuse, but abuse like make them feel stupid, look stupid.
Oh, right,
kind of
right.
And I guess you could take it that way, right? So you're a black belt, and you pride yourself on being able to put people to sleep with a rear naked choke, and he tells you, "Come on, my friend, put on me." And he puts it on you, and he's telling you tighter, and he gets out. And after he gets out, he'll go.
It hurts your ego.
Well, it might, but at first you're thinking is, what the hell was that, right?
Yeah,
right. And then he'll go, "Oh, I'm sorry, my friend, I got lucky. I think I might have gone before you were ready."
Right.
Even though you had it.
Right.
And he goes, come do it again. And he has you do it again. Yeah. And he goes, okay, make it tighter this time. Okay. And then he gets out again. Right. And then what happens is everybody starts thinking, oh, wow, if that guy couldn't get him, then I didn't really know how to do it. Right. The guy who was doing it to him thinks he can think, if he gets offended a lot, he'll think, Hansson just pulled me out to make me look stupid.
Just bullied me.
Yeah. Bullied, or just, wanted to make me look stupid in front of everybody else. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how it happens.
But that's stupid, right? Because he's of course the greatest. You should be lucky enough to even get a chance with him.
Well, yeah, I mean, some people look at it that way. Other people look at it as, dang, I thought I really had this. I guess I don't, right? So Hansson, show me what you did, right? To me, that's the way I would think, right? I don't think to myself that he made me look stupid, because I know, see, the thing is, though, I've already bought into Hansson's ability. Whereas a lot of people have not. A lot of people have no respect for Hansson Jiu-Jitsu. They think that the guys today are better than Hansson was in his prime. And I would, I don't know. It'd be kind of hard to say, because these guys are learning the art that he's always done. and they're getting pretty
He's
good at
standing
it.
on his shoulders. Okay.
Yeah. So are they better? Now, if they grew up at the same
With Hickson.
time as Hickson,
Exactly.
right? Would they be able to keep up with Hickson?
Yeah.
I say no. You know, and even people who came decades after him were not able to keep up with him.
Yeah.
And you know, I still remember reading the story about Paulo Filho, who was one of Carson Gracie's black belts, and who was
MMA
a
fighter.
Yeah, WEC, and he and Hickson were about the same size.
He said he couldn't do anything with him.
Yeah, and he even went further to say that he's trained with the best black belts that were
Carson
ever produced.
Gracie.
Carson Gracie team, and none of them could do to him what Hickson did to him.
Yeah.
And Hickson was well into his 40s then.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Dave Camarillo said. Like, he just went over there to Los Angeles, and he was like, I'm gonna, like, please demote me to blue belt again. And all the other white belts were like, if he's blue belt, then I'm like no belt.
Yeah, you know,
He
and
said he
that's the
couldn't
thing. Like
move.
I was saying about the ability difference between Hickson and even the bottom black belt.
Yeah.
It's that from there to there, it's a deeper distance than going from black belt down to white belt again. So it would make sense that someone like Dave Camarillo, who's phenomenal, I love watching he and his brother. In fact, I was just showing a video of them to one of my students about the blending of judo and jiu-jitsu, and how if you have world-class judo combined with world-class jiu-jitsu, this is what you have. And but yeah, I mean, for somebody like him to come back and say something like that about Hickson, it just goes levels to show how good Hickson was. You know, Hickson's 60 years old now, but you know, physically he's not as good as he was, but mentally, as far as what he knows and what he understands, it's better than he's ever been. Dave and I were lucky. Dave Kama and I were lucky enough. A month ago, in the first week of December, I was in California visiting for our Christmas party in California, and we had met with Hickson. It was supposed to only be 30 minutes, ended up being 2 hours and 30 minutes, and ended up basically giving me a private. But it was phenomenal, because something so basic as base and where I put my weight, as much as I think I have an understanding of it, and I teach my students, versus to what he was explained to me and what he could see, the difference from what he could see that I didn't have versus what I have versus my students, it's night and day. And it's always been mind-blowing. You know, every time I'd see Hickson, it's always a mind-blowing experience for me. I wish that I had my knowledge now training with Hickson back in the early mid-90s when I did, when I was a blue and purple belt. But I didn't have nearly the understanding then that I do now, and I appreciate him even more now.
Right. So has anyone come close to putting him in like any sort of trouble, or have you ever seen him get into trouble?
I'm sure. I don't know. You know, you hear stories. Now, whether the stories are true or not, I don't know. But I heard that a really good match for him, one that put a challenge up for him, was Mark Schultz.
Mark Schultz, yeah. He put him in a cradle for 20 minutes or something.
I don't know. It was a closed door thing. Nobody knows. Yeah. People can say they know, but they don't, because nobody was there but the two of them. Now, Mark Schultz, you know, two-time Olympic gold medalist, 2 or 3, I don't know. You know, one of the best wrestlers that has ever lived. So he knows grappling, and, you know, against Hickson. And from what I understand, Mark Schultz ended up joining Pedro Sauer's school after training with Hickson. You know, now I'm sure, you know, I'm pretty sure of it that Mark did not have a hard time with Pedro. But I think because Pedro's much smaller. But what I think was that he was kind of intrigued by what Pedro was doing, given how small he was. Exactly. And going, you know, I don't quite understand what Pedro's doing. He probably ends up submitting Pedro in the end. I think Pedro probably has a lot of injuries from training with Mark over the years, because, you know, the physicality is too great, the differential. Which is why when Hickson was in Utah, I think Pedro arranged for him to meet with Mark and train with him to kind of show Mark what the potential is of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And that, you know, like with me, I'm not the biggest, strongest guy, never was, and I'm not the best vessel for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu to to thrive in, right? You know, it would be somebody else who would have, you know, you know, so I guess somebody who might be perfectly put together for jiu-jitsu would be somebody like a Gordon Ryan.
Exactly.
You know, or like a Hodger Gracie, right?
Yeah.
Those guys are put together perfectly for jiu-jitsu. They're, you know, they're very tall, they're long,
Physicality.
they're heavy enough,
Yeah.
but they're not too heavy to be slow.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
you know, much, you know, they're much taller than Hansson,
Yeah.
right? Hansson's 5'8", 5'9". You know, these guys are like
6'2",
6'3" to
6'4".
6'5". I think Hodger's 6'5".
6'4". Yeah.
6'4", yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, that helps, you know, having that size differential helps, which is why after Hansson, I think the family champ, well, no, there never was a family champ after Hansson, but I guess the number 2 one could possibly have been Higa Machado, who's not a small guy. You know, he was much bigger than Hansson was. I think he, you know, I don't
You
know
mean
for sure.
at that time or now?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
now it's Hodger, right?
Yeah, no, but yeah, no, so I think if Hansson were not around, I think Higa Machado might have been
Right.
the family champion for at least a
Right.
period of time. I don't know.
Right.
Or Hansson. You know, Hansson never lost in
Yeah,
competition.
everybody says
either.
like Hansson is next to Hansson.
Yeah, I mean
He just
what
won't
I
do the
was.
absolute. That's it.
Well, the way Hansson put it to me was they would compete, right? You know, once they're, you know, they're both black belts. I think they might have gotten the black belt about the same time. Hansson didn't get his black belt till he was 21.
Yeah,
or
because like
22.
Helio was like, you know, like he was not giving him his black belt for some behavioral reasons or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just, you know, Elio has some criteria,
Yeah.
and you know, he probably held his sons to a pretty high standard.
Yeah.
And out of his sons, Hansson, I think, was held to the highest standard because Hansson mentioned that he was a rebel and liked to do things his own way. And
Right.
but you know, so the way he put it to me was he and Hansson were in the same weight class. Hansson was about 175 to 180. Hansson was 185. And the way he put it to me was that they would have the weight class and they have the absolute, and they would each enter both.
Mm-hmm.
But they'd be on opposite brackets in both.
Okay.
What would happen is they would meet up at the top for the absolute and meet up at the top for the weight class.
Right.
And then they would never fight each other in a tournament. Hansson would go home with the weight class and Hansson would go home with the absolute because Hansson was the better of the two.
The better of the two.
Yeah, but neither of them ever lost any tournament. But they call Hansson champion because Hansson went for a longer period of time. I think Hansson went like, I don't know, was it like 28 years undefeated? So
22 years,
even as a child, he never lost.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been longer than 22.
That's what he said. Like, I don't know.
Oh, he said 22? I could have sworn he told me 28 because he didn't leave Brazil until he was probably in his early 30s.
Okay.
But it could be 22. I'm not sure. Hansson obviously would know. But yeah, so whereas Hansson didn't go that long because Hansson left, he left Brazil, I think, age 28. So, but you know, Hansson never lost either.
Mm-hmm.
But Hansson went longer without losing. Which is why they call Hansson champion. But you know, if you know, Hansson would tell me straight up, he says Hansson is better.
Yeah.
But he would say after Hansson, he felt he was the
he was
the best.
number. Okay.
Yeah, but then you know, you get him, but you got people on the other side of the family. You know, it was a very contentious family that, you know, they would all say that kind of stuff. And then you have Carlet, who's up in San Francisco now, and he would say he was the best of the family.
Yeah.
And then you have Halls, and people say Halls was the best. It's hard to say, but I think if you look at who the undisputed champions were, they were Carlson, then Halls, then Hansson.
Right. So, I mean, like on like with regard to what you said, like there are like obviously the two sides of the family, and like both wouldn't agree with each other. But I have heard like the people from Gracie Baja, like telling the stories of when like Hansson would come there and like tap everybody, like all the top students of Gracie Baja, like one after the other, would ask them. I mean, it's not even like starting from a neutral position. It's like, you know, asking Hansson, asking them to put Hansson in a chokehold from the mount or something, and he would escape everybody's chokehold. And like he would try to do the choke and ask them to escape, and nobody could escape. So even I think the Gracie Baja admitted that Hansson is the best after, like, you know, getting to roll with him.
I think everybody who has either trained with Hansson, like informally, trained under him as a student, or saw him training with people they knew, I think that universe of people would all agree that Hansson was the best there ever was. The people who say that he wasn't are the people that really were not there. People who have zero experience with Hansson.
Yeah.
And they, unfortunately for them, they never got to experience it. But, you know, that's just the way life goes. You know, as far as the Baja Gracie stories you mentioned, in fact, it was told to me by one particular black belt who was there for one of the instances, and it was that Hansson had been living in Brazil at that time. He showed up and wanted to train. So he asked, is it okay if I join your class? Or like, yeah, you know, it was a black belt class. They had 20 plus black belts that were there. So they said, well, Hansson, since you're here, can you teach us something? So he's like, oh yeah, of course, no problem. So he then proceeded to say, okay, you lay down, and he mounted on him, and he was teaching how to do the choke from the mount.
Mm-hmm.
And they all kind of looked at him like, why are you teaching us this? This is so basic. This is white belt stuff. We know it. Right. And he says, yeah, but I think I've got some adjustments that I think will work for you. So he tried to show it to them, and they still weren't convinced. So he said, okay, look, I'll teach you whatever you guys want to teach, but here's what happens. I'm going to mount you, and you need to get out from my choke, right? You know, you just start mounted, and he goes, and I'll choke you, right? But if one of you gets out, I'll teach you whatever you learn. So then I asked this black belt, so what happened? What did you learn after that? He says, we learned how to do the choke, right? Because he choked everybody out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that's kind of how it didn't matter what concept it was. It could be, you know, you can play in his guard, and he'll say, you know, he'd be teaching you armbar for the guard. You say, I know that already. He'll just pull all the black belts and say, 20 of you, let's go. He goes, if one of you can get out, then I will teach you something else. But you know, that's just how he was so good at everything.
Right.
You just really, you know, for our purposes, he had no weakness. Now, does that mean he really had no weakness? No, it's just like I said, his field of vision was out here, and we were still in here.
Right. So do you think like even like people like Kron have at least reached up to that level, or like is Kron is still in the lower spectrum of like?
You know, I don't know. I don't know Kron. All I know is what I heard somebody telling me about. He did an interview with Joe Rogan. Yeah. And Joe had asked him how he does against his father, and he says, you know, he's always wanted to beat him, and he said, okay, let's go 2 minutes or something like that.
3 minutes, yeah,
3 minutes, because after that, then his physicality will take over. Mm-hmm. And he said Hansson caught him in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So
I mean, like,
so at that time, Hansson was still better. Now, obviously, Kron is still getting better, and you know, will he ever eclipse his dad? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think he's a little smaller than his dad too.
Yeah, that's true.
But you know, I've heard some stories about Kron that are just phenomenal. You know, I have this friend who was a student of mine at one time, and he was my best blue belt at the time, and he had gone over to visit Kron's school, and he was doing well against Kron's blue belts and purple belts, and then Kron kind of saw that, said, okay, it's my turn. I'll train with you now. And Kron put his right hand in his belt, and he trained with him one-handed and caught him twice in like 5 minutes. And he said it was easy. Kron caught him pretty easily. Yeah. And this is a good blue belt. I mean, I've seen this blue belt tap brown belts.
Right. Oh,
I saw him tap a black belt too. We had a visitor school. 2 of them actually. Yeah. But this particular student he had that perfect build, right? He was about 6'3", about 205 pounds, and really lean. Long, strong, you know, and Kron much smaller than him, and Kron just played with him one-handed. And Kron's phenomenal, you know. But like I've never met Kron. I knew Hansson when Hansson was in middle school, but I didn't know Hansson in high school. By then, I had already left Hanssons Academy.
Right. So, do you think the superhuman jiu-jitsu that Hansson possesses partially like attributes to his physicality too, because he was doing something called as a gymnastica natural, which like helps you get like better control of your human body, like instinctive, without like thinking too much and complicating yourself, like is executing high level techniques that will. So do you think that is a part of Hansson's game that nobody is able to, you know?
Well, if you ask Hansson, he says it's definitely a factor. But like I said earlier, it's about, you know, wavelength and, you know, bandwidth. You know, what I don't understand, you know, I cannot comprehend. So it's hard for me to
Exactly.
comment on something that I have no idea. You know,
Right.
you might as well ask me talk about neurosurgery. I don't know.
Right.
You know, it's just something that's out of my realm of understanding. But
Right.
if you look at Hansson in the total package, I'm not sure that Hansson could be better than what Hansson became. I seem to think that Hansson made the most of everything, you know, his brain, his body, his mindset, everything.
He completely
And
optimized everything, like his physicality.
as far as I can understand, yes.
Right. Right.
Right. You know, because there are a lot of people you see that they're just not quite, you know, they have some tools, but they can't seem to get that, you know, that to that next level. You know, I had a friend who was when he was in high school, he played football, he was a wide receiver, and he was a #1 prospect out of high school into college. And there's another student, another high school student who was also in his graduating high school class, and he was also a top prospect, but he was a #2 prospect. Well, #1 prospect, this friend of mine, he went to Notre Dame, #2 went to Miami. And #2 ended up making not only to NFL, he became a Hall of Famer. #1, after college, he never made it into the pros, played in Canada for a while, played arena football for a while, but that was it. And, you know, this guy, he was what they call a big wide receiver. He was 6'5", and he was about maybe 245 and fast, right? And he's those wide receivers that the defensive backs can't beat because they're just too big and too fast. I mean, he had everything going for him, physicality. But mentally, he didn't have it all. I mean, played through Notre Dame, got a championship in Notre Dame, but then could not take it to the next level. Couldn't take it to the pros. Whereas the other guy was able to. Not only had Super Bowl rings, but also an all-pro designations, but also became a Hall of Famer. So how is it? You know, two guys that are virtually identical in high school, but when they continue on, one optimized his abilities while the other didn't.
Mental content.
And I think that's what Hansson is. Hansson, you know, he doesn't have the perfect height and weight for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Right. But he was good enough, and he was able to do other enhancements to his body and his mindset to make him be bigger, so to speak. His technical level was so high, it would beat the physicality of much bigger, faster, stronger type.
Yeah, there's a video where you explain like the victory is equal to the sum totality of like the physicality and the technique. So you can compensate the loss of one with another.
Yeah.
Okay. So like you know, when you talk about this the outlier aspect of Hansson, like you know, this guy Eric Paulson, like, you know, the shooter guy, like he said in an interview, like, you know, I think it's a Black Belt magazine, like he was invited for a Gracie, like a private training session where all the family members of the Gracie clan trained, and like nobody could like come near Hansson. And so, but the thing is, you could argue like, okay, Hansson is better than everybody else in the sport because he's been doing it since he was in his diapers. But like that's the truth with all the other Gracies too, right? So you think like it's just because he is Hansson, like he's Hansson, or like it's just something like humanly attainable?
Well, look at it this way. When you think of any family of athletes, there's always going to be one that's better than the others.
Yeah.
You know, they're not, you know, they all have the same, they got trained the same way, they came from the same parents, they lived in the same house, ate the same food, but yet one of them is head and shoulders above the rest.
Right.
That's just an individual thing. You know, that person has, they're able to harness their potential to a much fuller degree than the others. Right. If you just think, you know, back when I was training, if you just think Gracie family member, they were all good. You know, as far as I was concerned, they were all good. But there was a hierarchy, right? They weren't exactly the same. You know, they say Elio trained them all, but there were ones that were different. You know, and Halls was as good as he was, but Halls wasn't a very big guy. From what I understand, Halls is about maybe 5'6", maybe 5'7", probably about 145, 150 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. He wasn't a big guy, but yet he was able to beat his brothers. And, you know, from what I understand, Carle Gracie, who we mentioned earlier, Carle was not a small guy. I heard he was 6 foot plus. And
so who's Carle? Like, whose son was he?
He was Carlos Sr.'s son.
Oh, okay. Carlos Seniors. Okay, right.
Yeah,
right.
You know, I just know it goes Carson, Hobson, Hansson, and then I'm not sure who they were, but I think if I remember right, Carle was maybe number 7. and then Halls was somewhere around maybe number 10.
Right.
So they were close in age,
Right.
but yet Halls, universally they say Halls was the best.
Right. Right.
And he was small, but he was able to optimize himself to where he could conquer bigger family members.
Right. Right. So one last question is, like, can you just share some like amazing story about like dojo story about Hansson with a great competitor? You don't have to name them for obvious reasons, but like what
Sorry,
you
what?
like, can you just share a story, like an amazing story of what you saw Hansson do to a high level competitor? Like you don't have to name them, but I just want to hear
Well, I
one untold
remember.
story.
Well, I don't know if it's untold because other people were there,
Right.
but there was this one Olympic level wrestler who used
Okay.
to take privates with Hansson, and
Right.
he was bigger. I mean, I'd probably say he's about 6 foot, probably weighed about maybe 210, and he was strong as an ox. And he would wipe almost everybody on the floor, when training with them, except for 3 people: Hansson, Dave Kama, and Mark Eckert. And Hansson was smaller, and Dave was about the same size as Hansson, as was Mark. There were 3 guys about maybe 5'8", actually Dave's 5'10". So they were about 5'9", 5'10", and they all weighed about 175 to 185 pounds. And this particular Olympic wrestler, he would just smash everybody, beat everybody, throw them around, ragdoll them. And, even Dave told me once, this guy grabbed Dave's ankle and picked him up off of the ground. That's how strong he was, and Dave was very surprised by his strength. But yet, their jiu-jitsu was so good that they could beat him.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
Hansson beat him the easiest, but both Dave and Mark could also handle him as well. I mean, they have to handle the onslaught because this guy was physically a specimen. But that was actually pretty fun to watch.
Right.
And seeing the level of competitors that Hansson could produce at the time. I remember there was a prominent Southern California black belt, and he was training for the UFC. So he came into Hansson's studio, wanted to train with Hansson to prepare. And Hansson told him, just take my class. I'm not going to work with you one-on-one, but take my class. So he did. And when we were training, he ended up with a blue belt who was a good blue belt. He wasn't the best blue belt, but he was a good blue belt. And this blue belt had this particular black belt, what we call worst position, which is belly down and hooks in. And this black belt could not get out.
Wow.
It was kind of, but after a while you get kind of used to that, seeing that kind of stuff. And, like with Dave and Mark, these top Brazilian black belts would all come through after winning a contest back in Brazil at the Absolute. They all want to test themselves, and they all want to go against a real champion in Hansson, but Hansson would just say, just take the class. And they take the class and they end up with one of his brown belts and get smashed. And, it's a very humbling experience.
Right.
And I just wish that more jiu-jitsu practitioners could experience it. But, there are a lot of world champions and high-level trainers that you go with now that you train with them. They're just going to smash you. But it's not going to be Hansson. But, someday going forward, champions of today, maybe 20, 30 years from now, people are going to go, wow, that guy was the greatest. And, in retrospect, was he better than Hansson Gracie? I don't know. It's hard to say.
That's right.
Unless they actually go up against each other.
Yeah. You think like Hansson is still taking classes? Like, is there any way to get a private from him?
There is, but with COVID, he is kind of isolating himself.
Yeah.
So is he doing any? I don't know if he's doing any private training now, but I'm sure that he will at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to be able to get a private with him. But if you can get one, consider yourself fortunate.
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your input.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime, my friend. Take care.
Yeah, I would love to do a part 2 with more questions. Today I was kind of starstruck, because I've been watching your videos for 2 years or something like that. So I'm I just forgot what I was supposed to ask. So I need to do a part 2 with more elaborate, things anytime.
All right. Well, just let me know what works for you.
Sure.
All right.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Take care now. All right.
Yeah. You too. Bye-bye.